We need a conservation organization to be able to be the friend of the bad guy and not bullshitting it. It's like the government doesn't want us to intervene, so we're going to step away. But that's not how we're going to solve the problem. I just like looked at the woman and I was like, wow, this is serious. As far as I know, Mars isn't habitable yet.
Right. And even if it was, we live here.
Tsunamis, hurricanes, cyclones, floods, they're all natural disasters. And the best solution to addressing these threats is...
Welcome to the Good Profits Podcast, where we explore stories and strategies behind today's most inspiring impact-driven businesses. I'm your host, Doriana, and together we'll dive deep into the world of social enterprise, ethical business, and sustainability, bringing you the conversations with the visionaries who are making a difference. Let's dive in.
So we're here with a special guest, Claudia Lievano. She's an expert in marketing and communications for sustainability, specifically climate change. She works for the Nature Conservancy, and we're going to be talking about the importance of communications for your impact. So I'll hand it over to Claudia. So how about you start off with telling us what's the why behind why you do what you do, and how did you get into it?
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here, Dorian. And I would insult the experts if you called me an expert. But I've been doing this for about 6 years now. I've always loved nature. I'm not sure where that came from because I grew up in Miami amongst the buildings and the craziness, lights, sounds. But I was always really deeply connected to the ocean. So I was about 15 when I was an intern at the Seaquarium. And it was like I was a camp counselor. But I always wanted to do like dolphin psychology. It was weird. I loved it. And I think that's where I can first recall my connection to wanting to protect something other than myself and finding like a deep similarity to something other than a human. So it was like dolphins were like the next greatest thing apart from my mom,
That's cute.
And then I go to college and I have to decide literally within a day what my major is going to be, which is super stressful. And I was between wildlife ecology and conservation and broadcast journalism because I wanted to be like the person in front of a camera, like giving the news of the day. So I ended up going with that, ended up never doing that. And now I'm back to my roots of working for a conservation organization. And it's been with a lot of like twists and turns, but I feel like I've finally integrated like my love for communicating and also nature and protecting not only the planet in which we all live in, but also the people that live in it thanks to nature.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I didn't even know that dolphin psychology was an area of study. That's really fascinating.
It's like marine biology, but you can focus on like animal behavior and like sea mammals.
I see.
But I wanted to do like dolphin training, and there's a lot of speculation behind that. But there's also importance to this type of work, But I'm not gonna get into like aquariums and stuff because that's a whole other
ballgame.
Yeah.
I got you. So it's interesting because before we started recording, you were telling me a little bit about your career path. So not the most straightforward. You started with media and broadcasting. You were a teacher for some time before finding your way back into more of the Nature Conservancy. So what was that like for you, that journey?
Yeah, so I graduated or right before graduation, it's like, oh, everyone would ask you, like, where are you going to work? And that was so stressful because you'd be, like, at a bar just having fun. And you'd be like, oh, like, what's your job? It's like, I haven't graduated. But I knew that education and the environment were the two realms I wanted to be in. So I ended up getting a teaching fellowship, which is what took me to DC. So I taught 8th grade English humanities and which means language arts and history. And my training was actually done with first graders, and I focused my whole curriculum on the environment. And it was beautiful to see how like 5 and 6 year olds are so empathetic to. So I remember like reading them a book where you see a bird flying with like a piece of like the beer plastic, like the 6 packs. And one of the girls starts crying and she's like, is this what we're doing to the animals? And to this day, this was like 8 years ago, and it still like makes me emotional because I'm like, wow, at this age you can start teaching them to care for the environment. So I was a teacher in DC for 2 years and still love education because I think that's the gateway to everything.
Yeah.
So now my focus is more like educating and bringing awareness to the importance of protecting our environment. So now I work for the Nature Conservancy, and I've got to work with the Latin America side, which is where I'm from, Colombia. My family, I was born and raised in the United States. But I think there's also a big part of me that realizes that my connection to nature comes from my roots and my indigenous descent, and because Colombians are partly indigenous. I was 20 when I left the US for the first time by myself outside of Colombia, and I lived in Brazil, and I was doing a teaching internship there, where I taught kids. Like I would come in to 10 different public schools in Brazil, in Porto Alegre, which is in the south, and I would teach them like sustainability initiatives and ways to become like more fully like well-rounded adults, because these were like 14 to 18-year-old students. And my favorite topic was teaching them about sustainability. And I could see the way I would teach about sustainability was so different than when I taught about like World War II. You know, so that's like, I need to get closer to this. And now a lot of the communications that I do is geared towards what we call at the Nature Conservancy mindful movers, which is, I believe it's like 15 to 40-year-olds. And don't quote me on that, but it's like Gen Z and millennials. And I don't like saying educating, but it's more inspiring. More of these audiences that are more young, that are younger and have that like spark in them to want to create change. And that was super inspiring to see. And for me, like the biggest threat that we're facing as a human species is climate change. So it was through teaching that I found my calling for environmental protection as well.
And I know that you shared that before working with the Nature Conservancy, you started out at a marketing agency, and then through one of Princeton's programs, Princeton in Latin America, you were able to find your footing within the Nature Conservancy.
The Princeton program came before the marketing agency.
Okay.
So it was a fellowship where the only skill I could say I had, because I had only taught ever in my career, was my communications background from my undergrad. And I spoke Portuguese because of this study abroad. I spoke Spanish and I spoke English. So that was the importance of being able to communicate in more than one language is like such an advantage in any field you're in.
Yeah.
And they could just see my passion. Like, I don't think it was so much, it wasn't at all the experience I had because I had none. It was more the passion I showed, and wow, I'm going to be communicating about these amazing projects that we're doing. And I remember being like in the onboarding, and my manager was just like telling me about the projects, and I was fascinated, like taking notes, like 20-page notes, because this topic to me was like, how do people not care about this, right? So we're being affected by climate change every single day of our lives. To go back to your question, so they hired me to do a fellowship for a year, communicating about environmental projects in Latin America. And it was a 1-year fellowship, and I knew it was going to end. So I started looking for jobs within the organization and also outside. and I got hired to be a coordinator for a public interest communications firm, which they do all types of social impact. So they really focused on health. They focused on climate topics such as deforestation, indigenous peoples, oceans. And so they hired me to sit in the indigenous peoples and deforestation team. And that was interesting, although it was 3 weeks before COVID hit that I got hired. So that really changed the dynamic of my role. But it was basically putting on top newspapers and headlines the needs and importance of protecting indigenous peoples and local communities when it comes to these type of issues such as loss of habitat, cutting down trees by big companies, which is where people live, poisoning rivers that these communities use to drink water and cook. So I did that for 2 years, and then I came back to the Nature Conservancy to focus on more of the marine ecosystem communications.
I see. Is that more of the area that you focus on now, more the marine side?
I do both, but since I sit on the Caribbean team, a lot of it is marine ecosystem. So mangroves and coral reefs are the main two ecosystems I talk about.
So your region specifically is the Caribbean. Primarily that. Okay. What was one of the things that drew you to the Nature Conservancy? Or was it more, maybe not convenience is the right word, but you had that fellowship and you enjoyed your time there?
No, I love that question because I can rave about the Nature Conservancy, and I won't do that here, but I think the way we position ourselves as an organization is we're the conveners. We sit with governments, we sit with corporations, and we bring them to have this discussion. And I think that's important when we talk about climate change is we're not talking one-sidedly about the problem, where it's more of like a dialogue and a conversation. So I love that we position ourselves as conveners, where we're bringing in Coca-Cola, we're bringing in oil companies, we're bringing in like soy monoculture companies, and we're saying like, this is the impact you're having on the planet. How can you work to counteract the things that you're doing? Because these corporations aren't going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
They have all the money, they have all the power behind governments, etc. So I thought that was quite beautiful, where it's like, that makes sense. We need a conservation organization to be able to be the friend of the bad guy. And equally so, we have so much of our work is collaborating with the local community and really talking to them and understanding their needs and not bullshitting it. You know, it's like there's a lot of conservation orgs where it's like the government doesn't want us to intervene, so we're going to step away. But that's not how we're going to solve the problem. It's by really challenging the government and making them realize, like, no, this is something you need to focus on.
Like something you should care
Providing
about.
recommendations to the government. And we've seen it, for example, in the case of one of the countries I lead communications for is Jamaica. And the way that we have been able to recommend and provide enabling policy frameworks so that they can incorporate solutions based on like natural ecosystems. So what I mean by that is, like, we need to put money behind things that are actually working. And we know that Jamaica is very prone to hurricanes and flooding and cyclones and tsunamis because of its geographical location. So it's like, by investing in planting more mangroves, we're going to help reduce the risk of these natural disasters from affecting your country more than it already will by implementing this. So governments like Jamaica have taken this into consideration and been like, wait a minute, this makes sense. This is a win-win for us. This is a win-win for nature and the people of this country. So that's TNC's role. and why I'm so drawn to the organization.
It's so interesting, at least for me, since more of the climate change and sustainability, I'm not as tapped in to that side of impact. And so I guess for me, normally what I hear about is more of the policy side and advocacy on that front. So it's really fascinating that how you put it. I like the way you put it. Befriending the bad guy
Yeah.
is an approach, because at the end of the day, it's 100% true. The larger corporations, they have a hand in the government and in the policy. So you need to find some type of middle ground to
Right.
say, you can still do business and do it well while improving, things for the planet and for the people who live around your operations.
Yeah, and it's in sustainability, it's discussed a lot, but the people that emit the least amount of carbon, or they have the lowest carbon footprint in the world, are the ones that bear the largest brunt of the impact. So that means local communities just live for themselves, right? They're not these mega like consumers like the US. Like they live for themselves. They consume very little energy. Their carbon footprint, or what they do in their everyday behaviors, is not impacting the climate the way your average American impacts the climate. Has a huge apartment, leaves the lights on, comes back, orders Uber Eats, goes on all these flights for a weekend to Ibiza. Like that is a huge polluter of our atmosphere. So Americans that live in their condos with air conditioning aren't seeing the everyday effects of climate, right? But their behavior and actions are impacting those that aren't contributing as much to the problem, such as your local communities that live along the coastal areas that don't have electricity, that don't have running water. These are the people, like I've been to communities. Well, it's crazy to even like think about it, but I've been to communities, this was 2 years ago, in the Dominican Republic, where we're working to reduce the impact of natural disasters, but every time they are flooded because of a hurricane, they have to physically move their homes more inland. And this keeps happening because the land keeps getting eroded.
So every time there's a hurricane or a flood, they physically need to move their home more inland.
Yes. This is wild. Can you imagine? Like, you move your New York condo inland every time because your house got flooded.
So every year, every 2 years.
That makes no sense in my head because I'm privileged. You know, I live in a home that has AC, that has running water. Like,
these are things we don't have to think about.
We don't. And these people, me as the communications person, were coming to me like, how can you help me? I just like looked at the woman and I was like, wow, this is serious. I'm going to take this back to my organization because you will get our help, whatever that means, like financially or through these projects. But the fact that these communities have to physically move their homes inland because that is one of the major direct effects of climate change is coastal erosion. So what that means is like the ocean is eating up the land every time because sea levels are rising.
That's wild. And it's crazier to think about how insulated some of us are from thinking about those things. Or even, there's a lot of people who think that climate change isn't real or that global warming is just some ploy for whatever. But it's a lot because we don't have to see those everyday effects. We don't have to face that on a daily basis. But there are people who are. That's wild. So is this one of the projects that the TNC, the Nature Conservancy, is primarily focused on? And what types of projects are you primarily focused on with them?
Yeah, so I was hired almost 3 years ago to do climate adaptation communications. And
so what exactly does that mean?
So climate adaptation means we're working with the communities that are the most directly affected by climate change because they are already seeing the impacts on their everyday lives, on their livelihoods. So it's not a matter of mitigating So there's climate adaptation and mitigation.
Okay.
Mitigation means how can we lessen the impacts of climate change, where adaptation is climate change is already here in our backyards. How can we adapt to it now? What that looks like in this specific project that I was leading, it was a partnership that the Nature Conservancy created with the International Federation of the Red Cross. And ideally, what it does is reduce the risk of natural disasters by implementing nature-based solutions. So the answer in protecting nature is within nature. For example, tsunamis, hurricanes, cyclones, floods, they're all natural disasters. And the best solution to addressing these threats is by planting more trees, by educating and teaching fishermen and fisher folk how to be more sustainable when they fish, restoring the coral reefs. So that is the essence of climate adaptation, is we have to adapt to a very fast and quick changing climate because we're already seeing the effects of it.
So, in the example that you gave with the woman who came to you about how they would have to move their homes back, what would a specific example be for what ways her community would adapt to the climate change? Like, would there be a way to prevent the flooding or mitigate some of the damage from like hurricanes or things that they were experiencing?
Yeah, so that's a super real example because it integrates all the ecosystems that my organization and my team are trying to protect via communications. So this example of the woman that had to physically move her house inland every time there was some type of disaster, she said, I used to cut down the mangroves in my backyard. But after seeing the flood that happened, because the river, what happens is the river and the ocean, they
overflow.
They overflow. I was thinking in Spanish. So the river banks overflow. And what this does is in a matter of seconds, this woman said she looks to her right and she sees the river just like coming like giant cascade.
Oh my God.
And she says the part of her backyard that had the mangrove trees was the part that didn't get flooded. She's like, now I understand the importance of not cutting down these mangroves. So ways that she could adapt and lessen the effects of floods is planting more mangroves. That's one direct solution. And partners like TNC and local partners provide these seeds for the community so that
they can do that.
So they can grow them. Another one is, say, her husband, her son, they're fishermen, telling them about sustainable practices to not overfish where there's coral reefs, because that's going to affect the coral reefs as well as the fish populations there. So it's like, hey, there's other ways to do this. There's these protected areas that you should not and cannot be fishing in. There's a certain size of a fish that you're not supposed to fish. So really building capacity and knowledge in the communities of what are ways to feed yourself, your family, without affecting the population of fish and the ecosystem and their habitats.
Man, this is so fascinating.
And then one other thing that we did specific to this project was these people that had to move further inland because of the natural disasters taking place, ever more common than before. So every year they have to plan for this. Is we helped them build what we call a facility for fishers where they can store their gear and they can store their boats, their fishing equipment, rather than having to walk miles every day with their fishing equipment, so that they can just wake up, walk a few kilometers to the sea, open their locker and take their equipment. So that's improving their lives, their everyday lives, improving their livelihoods. A fear of the fishermen was getting their boats stolen. So as crazy as this sounds, there's boundaries within the ocean, right? So every country has like ocean boundaries that belongs to them. And in the border of that marine territory, there's pirates. So these pirates are coming in and invading the other country to fish what belongs to this country.
I see.
And also stealing the fishermen's boats. So they feared that. But with this facility that we constructed for them, they have a safe place to lock up.
To keep everything, all of their
Exactly.
equipment, the boats. So I'm curious for like those who are listening, most people aren't going to be living in a place where they would be heavily affected. So what do these things mean for people who aren't living in a community like this? Or like what's the takeaway if we're not in a neighborhood that would need to take these adaptive measures to the same extreme?
What is the what, sorry?
So what's like the takeaway, or what's the connection between people like us who might not live in this type of environment where you need to take those drastic measures to adapt to the climate change to the same level?
Yeah. Even in the last 5 years that I've been working in this field, I open the news every day and I'm shocked. Like we're living in what I feel is the apocalypse. There's a crazy flood in Asia happening. There's extreme heat waves in North America. Coral bleaching, which is a disease that attacks coral that kills off all the coral, is the worst it's ever been. Like, this is real. There's no denying it. Science shows that humans are the drivers of climate change. Science says it, local communities say it, indigenous. There's nowhere that you can find that this isn't real and it's not affecting everybody. Whether that's your morning cup of coffee from Starbucks or your favorite coffee shop in New York, you're not going to get good coffee in the next 5-10 years if you're not talking about climate change and doing something about it.
Because it won't exist.
It won't exist. Only very poor quality varieties will make it to your neighborhood. And the reason for this is because coffee crops especially are being attacked by this fungus that is killing off all the coffee varieties that is being shipped to North America and to Europe. So the fancy places. So if you live for your morning cup of coffee, that's going to be gone. Like, forget it. You're no longer going to enjoy coffee. It's affecting the way we produce beer because hop plants are being affected. Because agriculture is one of the biggest businesses that is being impacted by climate change. You're going to have hotter summers, colder winters. Your 4th of July plans, goodbye, because they're going to be thunderstormed on. Like, it's everywhere.
It's all the delicacies of life will be
Right.
impacted. Like
It's
you
like-
said, beer and coffee, people live for those things.
Right, and I'm trying to connect it to like the American mindset of 4th of July, beer, coffee.
Those everyday things that people look forward to.
Right. Water is energy. I learned this the other day. Guatape, which is like a town in Colombia, near Medellin, they export energy to 5 countries in Latin America.
I didn't know
And
that.
it's all hydroelectric power. The thing is, the point where it's ran dry for a few months, that's affecting tourism. So that's affecting the community there because they're not getting any money from tourism anymore. And there's no energy to export to these other countries in every part of your life.
It touches everything.
Right. One of the craziest and closest examples of how climate change has affected my life was my family lives in Bogota. And there's a rationing of water because Bogota had no water. The 3rd largest city in Latin America
Didn't have water.
didn't have water. And to this day, they have to ration the water.
They're still doing it.
They're still doing it. That blows my mind. Bogota's not that far from Miami. It's a 3-hour flight. So yeah, I mean, I don't see the US being saved from climate change. There's absolutely no way.
Yeah.
And I think it's really thinking about your everyday actions and behaviors that are going to lead
Mm-hmm.
to you making a difference in tackling climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And where things are headed, because we're all part of it. Like you said, the countries and cities that are the biggest consumers, we might not have our cities being flooded, like the woman who has mangroves in her property, but
right,
we're still being impacted, and we're the biggest pushers of it because we're the largest consumers.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to go that far. Miami,
Yeah,
last
that's
week,
right here.
the news last week was like Miami's flooding. It's like people from Miami, the politicians of Miami don't know what to do because the city is literally being flooded every week. Something they hadn't prepared for because they didn't believe in, so they didn't put any money behind trying to mitigate this. Um, and now it's a real problem because there's so
Mm-hmm.
many high rises. High rises are being flooded. Parking lots. It's ruining people's luxurious cars. It's ruining their condos. Like, this is real.
Mm-hmm. I saw the post that you had put in your story the other day, like the street just completely flooded.
It's a river. Like, you literally
Mm-hmm.
are in a river, and this is in one of the most expensive neighborhoods of Miami.
Mm-hmm. Which you think should be protected.
Right.
You think you should be safe from that,
Yeah.
right?
But you're
But you're
living with
not.
this. Like, I have no way to get to work right now.
Mm.
The city can't do much about this because they didn't think about this. And Miami has become such a hub for a lot of young professionals in tech. So there's been a huge migration of
Mm.
young professionals, and there's a demand for housing. So what are people doing? They're gentrifying like very historic neighborhoods like Little Haiti, Little Havana, where these families have been living for generations, and they're just literally like
Being pushed out.
being pushed out, and they're building high rises. And that's the complete opposite of what you should be doing right now in a city like Miami. That is, I mean, by 2050, if nothing is going to be done about climate change,
Mm-hmm.
it'll be inhabitable. And I can't remember where, but it's a city in Asia that has been officially considered inhabitable because of climate change, because it's too hot for people to live in.
Wow.
A city that was once or is populated by humans,
Mm-hmm.
in a few years you can't live there
You won't
because
find people there at all.
humans can't tolerate the heat. And like the heat is literally killing thousands of people every day.
Mm.
Something that was unheard of.
That's insane, but that's the world that we're in now.
It's very scary.
And that really shows the urgency of what's happening and, what the everyday person can do about it.
Yeah. And I think climate change, when you think about it, it's like, oh, these climate change activists, like doom and gloom. Like, yes, there's a lot to that because we're living in very real times of this is
Mm-hmm.
actually hurting us. But I think behind that, there's this beauty of hope, of, okay, now that I'm feeling this, like maybe I should do something about it. And there's so much hope there where I see it in young people so much. I see it in my everyday life with my roommates, with my friends. Like, I always, maybe I'm annoying. I think I definitely am annoying when it comes to like, hey, like try not to eat meat every day, or why don't you compost that? When I was in DC, I got all my roommates to start composting. And it's something as simple as you get a gallon Ziploc bag. When you're going to cook, you put it out, you throw in all your food waste, and then you freeze it. And then every Sunday, I would take all of my roommates' compost to the farmer's market so it could be composted. My closest friends have adopted like a vegetarian diet. Eating meat is actually one of the biggest reasons for climate change.
The carbon emissions, right?
Carbon emissions of cows, deforestation for cows to graze on. And it's like, okay, why don't I just eat meat one meal a day and then 1 week a day? And you will realize the impact you're doing. If all of us do this, it doesn't have to be like, oh man, I really want meat today, but I can't have it because I already had meat yesterday. It doesn't have to be like that. We're not perfect. But if we're more conscious of our actions, like that's making a huge difference.
That's a huge step right there.
It takes one person, right? It's like every drop makes an ocean. And like that's how I feel. It's like I am one person, and by my actions, I will be able to make an impact. And there's no denying that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing like the reality of it and the connection that we all have to it, whether or not we notice every day or see those changes, but it's impacting all of us, and we're also part of the impact that other people are feeling more than we feel.
100%.
That's so important. I feel like I'm learning so much from this conversation. I'm so glad you came.
Oh, thank you. I'm so grateful for this friendship. Cheers. With water.
With your water. So we talked about like how the Nature Conservancy is making strides and changing things for local communities. One of them is through like advocacy, working with the bad guys, as we called it. Another is through communications and really talking about the impact things are having on the sustainability side. So some of our listeners, they'll have their own impact-driven business, or they're working with a nonprofit where measuring and communicating the impact is super important. What are some ways that you've seen that translate? How are people receiving the communications, and what changes have you seen? And what is some advice that you would have for a founder or someone working in a nonprofit to be able to do that effectively? I know that's kind of a loaded question.
From my experience, because I've only worked in the nonprofit world, or with a governmental organization, I can't speak for someone that is a business entrepreneur. But I think there is so much relevance to having a business that has sustainable goals or whose mission is to drive more of a sustainability type of change or behavior, etc. So I think when I think about communications, which is what I know in this space, is who are you talking to? And this is the basics of communication.
Yeah.
But finding a link to who is your audience and how can I link this product or this, what I want to communicate to this person that's listening. And like we just mentioned, climate change can be connected to absolutely everything. And we're seeing it more than ever in health-related issues. People might find this hard to believe, but a big reason why the pandemic that broke out in 2020 took place was in part driven by climate change or the climate crisis.
That's insane, and that's something that's not widely talked about, or that connection isn't
But
made.
you look it up, and there's scientific journals, a bunch of news articles, which I think was the cool part of me being in a media agency during COVID, was like, how can we connect the crisis to, or to the how can we connect the pandemic to the climate crisis? And there's so much similarity there.
There's a lot of overlap. Sure.
So anything you can possibly think of is connected to climate and the variabilities that you're seeing in our weather patterns because of human-driven climate change. So that's one.
A big one.
Yeah. So it's like when you think of climate change, you're thinking of the health of humans. Really, it comes down to that. The health of us, the the hope we have for humanity. Like, will my grandchildren be able to see, I don't know, this river that I absolutely love? Probably not.
It might not be there.
No, but it's like you really do have to put into perspective. It's not just about me and my life, but it's about
Everything that
future
comes after.
generations to come. It's like, am I gonna leave a healthy planet for my child
To live on and enjoy.
so that they can swim in clean rivers, so that they can drink rainwater? Because acid rain is a real thing right now.
Right, because we should not be drinking it. Rainwater.
Right, and
Yeah.
that's the way people get water.
In a lot of
Majority of
places.
people get water from rain. That's like such a tangent from your question, but
No, but it's, I mean, that's the reality. Like,
it's relevant. I think also the way we move in cities and our generation especially is like, what is everyone else doing? Like, what is the norm?
yeah, and then basing what we care about based
Like,
on
what is
this
cool?
norm.
What is cool? Sustainable fashion, which I'm loving this trend of like, I shop at Goodwill. That's amazing because and I'm part of the problem, right? Because I've shopped at Zara, I've shopped at H&M, but these giant corporations, they don't care. They don't care about anything except their profit. They don't care
Like the people
about
who make them,
right.
the
They don't
supply chain.
they don't care about the supply chain. They don't care about the sweatshops, the people working for them. They don't care about externalities is a big word in sustainability. Externalities is when we pay someone else to do the damage. So I'm not going to, hire local American workers to do the job for me. I'm going to hire locals with very poor conditions in Vietnam. And that's an
They might not have
externality.
those safety standards. They might not have those.
Right. And they're happy with $2 a day. So again, it's like, how is my business going to be positioned? And how will I position my business so that I understand the everyday impact that it has on the environment, on other people, on my consumers? So linking it to like what's in right now, what's cool. And I think talking about climate change, being green, greenwashing, which is not actual doing the green or being green, but these companies like sustainable fashion is in and like this is good. Like we want more of this. So it's like what's cool now? Recycling. Maybe. I don't know. Composting, like going vegan. It's like I'm not doing this to be cool, but if other people are doing it, it's because I think it's
catching.
It's catchy and it's important.
And I think like we're in a generation now with Gen Z and millennials, especially like Gen Z, the younger people, they really care. It's no longer like, I'm just thinking about how accessible is this to me, where people are asking questions like, so where was it made? Who made it? How are they, how are they being treated? What's the impact on the environment?
Yeah. I love that because that's actually such an easy question to ask yourself, but you don't ask yourself enough that question. And by you, I mean us. Like
general, yeah.
Where does my water come from? Where does my clothes come from? Where does my food come from? This is all being traced back to nature. Yeah, I think, like you said, these younger generations are much more aware of that. And I think having been an eighth grade teacher in DC, I saw like these kids just inspire and have so much hope. These were the kids that were walking out of class to go on a climate protest in front of the White House and saying like, we demand enabling policies for a healthier planet. Like these 13-year-old kids. So that brings me so much hope. And I think it's everyone's duty. It shouldn't just be the kids that are having to fight for a healthy planet.
Yeah. All of us are responsible for, the world that we leave for the people who come after us.
Exactly.
I mean, we can't say that, we messed it up, so it's out of our
And I'm
hands.
gonna die soon, or
Right, I'm not gonna be here for it, so whatever.
exactly. Which, not to call people out, but that's the mentality of the majority of people that live in the Northern Hemisphere. Like, it's not my problem.
Individualistic mindset. Yeah.
It's not my problem. Like,
I didn't do it. I don't have to fix it.
but you're the one whose yacht plans are being affected by heavy rains, right? So,
Or even just for the everyday person, like, this brand has clothes that are really cheap or super accessible. So that's great for me. So I can buy what I need. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think that you are just one person and you won't make a difference, you're wrong. Because you can. You can question yourself in your everyday actions and habits. Everything you do has an impact. Every single decision you make has an impact. It's like, where am I going to buy this white shirt that I really like from? Am I going to buy it from a local designer that gets all their materials from local producers and makes this shirt and pay a little bit more for something that's good quality and was made in this city? Or am I going to go shop at Shine, or is it Shine? Shane?
I've heard different things. Shane, Shine,
I've never
Shein,
shopped there, but I am guilty of
whatever, insert your fast fashion brand.
Exactly. Like, I'm definitely guilty of that because it's so in your face
It's
in
in
the
your
US.
face and it's accessible.
And it's cute and it's cheap, and I don't need something to last me forever because I can't be an outfit repeater. But let's make wearing the same outfit cool, because it's showing that I'm not a consumerist. Like, I'm actually thinking about what I'm buying. I think fashion is a big way to contribute. And your eating habits. There's this scientist that works at the Nature Conservancy, and she says, shop local. So if you're able to shop at a farmer's market, do it. Eat local, and also think about eating at the bottom of the food chain. So
What does that mean exactly?
Incorporating more grains into your diet. So top of the food chain is like your predators, like you're eating animals that eat the plants.
Gotcha.
So eat lower in the food chain, which means let's substitute this roast beef sandwich for a salad with tofu. That's yummy, right?
You asking the wrong person. I'm not a huge tofu fan, but there are many ways that you can get your protein, and many ways that you can spice it up a little bit so it's still good.
Exactly. So it's like, I don't know, I wake up every day and I'm like, I'm more mindful of how am I contributing to my carbon footprint. And if you have no idea what a carbon footprint is, it's how are my everyday actions and decisions emitting carbon into the atmosphere, which is the greatest driver of global warming or climate change. The Nature Conservancy, which is nature.org, has a carbon footprint calculator. And it'll tell you, like, are you over consuming? The average American consumes, like, as if they had 2.5 planets or something of planet Earth, or something way higher, actually. We have one planet, and that's it.
Not 2.5.
We don't have 2.5 planets. As far as I know, Mars isn't habitable yet.
Right.
So.
And even if it was, we live here.
Right. I don't see myself moving to Mars anytime soon.
Couldn't be me. Couldn't be me.
But I think there's value in just talking about it. Like, hey, let's talk about climate change. Okay, cool. Like, what do you think about it? It's a hot topic, but it could be cool to, like, pick your family's minds about it and see, like, share a tip. Like, have you thought about composting? Have you thought about, reducing your meat to 2 or 3 times a week? Like, there's very
Like realistic
tangible
ways
things that you can
that you can
do.
do. Not everybody needs to go full vegan overnight.
We don't need that.
Yeah.
It's not realistic to think about it that way. It's not. And of course, not everyone can be vegan or vegetarian, but there's other ways, How can for me, trash is like something I think about a lot. It's like, how much trash am I creating for just me? I feel like I don't create too much trash because I'm mindful of, okay, am I bringing my own Tupperware? Am I eating with my own like silver fork and knife
That you can
instead of
wash again, yeah.
yes. So it's things that you can do and change immediately.
And things you can encourage your friends and people in your circle to do. Those small things on a larger scale make a huge
difference.
Huge difference.
And there's this line that says like your contribution is an important piece of a bigger puzzle, and it's literally that.
Yeah. The mindset of I'm just one person doesn't fly. It's funny because I used to think about like the biggest burden isn't necessarily on the individual. Like the individual isn't contributing a massive amount. Normally it's going to be about the corporations who we're buying from. However, if the mindset of the general population changes, we are going to be the ones and the catalyst for changing the larger corporations. And that was a huge mindset shift for me, like thinking like I'm just one person, like what is that going to do? Like 0.0000001% change. But collectively, that's what it really does.
100%. And I think we are the consumers. Like corporations need one person as a consumer, right? And if one person and one person and one person and one person starts to question, like, where is this product that I'm always buying come from? Corporations are going to have to start thinking that way. Like, my consumers care about where their products are coming from. I can no longer be careless about my supply chain and kill off all these trees and displace all these people for the sake of my product. There's a lot of power in talking about it and thinking about it and doing something about it.
Yeah. I heard a quote. It said, we vote with every purchase that we make. Every purchase that we make is a vote for a better world. And it's exactly that. We are telling the businesses what we want to see. So if we're continually purchasing something, we're telling them, yes, we're co-signing that. But if we stop and we say, no, I'm not going to buy from you until XYZ changes, then they're forced to do that because they want to make money. And that's just how we have to work. Yeah.
And really digging into, like, really understanding, like, what are the impacts of me buying this? I think Amazon, not to hate on, I'm guilty of buying off Amazon, but it's like, do I really need my whitening toothpaste
within 2 days or whatever it is?
Right. Can I wait 5 days? Of course I can, because that's going to reduce my emissions. And you can actually go to customer support and like tell them that you want, I don't need plastic packaging. Like you can tell them, can you make my purchase the most sustainable possible? And they can do that for you.
I didn't even know that.
I canceled my Amazon like a while ago. If I wanted a book, I would shop at a local bookstore. And I get it. I mean, I work for this, so it's top of mind for me every day. And I'm not saying everyone should cancel their Amazon subscription, although they should. But but it's like, if you can wait a few days, do it, because you're not putting at risk the lives of people that have to rush to get it to you. And so there's that social part. And then environmentally, you're not wasting more carbon emissions so that your product gets there within 12 hours or same day, which I think same day is a thing, right?
Yeah. Same day, next day.
You
It
don't
used to just be the 2 days.
you don't need that unless you have like some heart condition and you need your medication. That's different. But you don't need what you
Most of the
bought.
time, we don't. Yeah.
9 out of 10 times you don't. So it's like, let's think about it. Let's inspire myself and others to think about how are my habits and behaviors and actions impacting and contributing to climate change.
And the world as a whole. What are some common challenges that you see for either nonprofits or on the business side who want to communicate their impact, but maybe not be doing that in the most effective way? What are some challenges or even like mistakes that you might see in that area?
I think it's important to focus on like who exactly are you trying to talk to and really understanding their interests. And this goes back to like basic communications, but I think it's important to understand what are their policy views. For example, at the Nature Conservancy, a large percentage of our donors are conservative Republicans that have been donating for generations. And if they see the word climate change, they freak out
They get there.
because that's left rhetoric. That's like left side democratic rhetoric. So it's even tailoring your language. What do they want to see? So rather than, I know Greg doesn't like to see the word climate change in my email, so let me put like, you are conserving the land and waters of this territory, because Americans are all about protecting their rivers and their mountains, right? And their hikes and their birds.
Which is fascinating because it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. And this is real. Like, it's like you send them like a little postcard and you put a face of an indigenous person. It'll be like, I'm not donating for this. I'm donating for you to protect this specific bird. What are you doing? Like, I'm gonna stop donating to you. So like really understanding your audience. Okay, you want that little bird? Okay, cool. So we're gonna put that bird in the front of your postcard because that's what matters to you. So what matters to your consumer, the people that you're trying to talk to, and not just generalizing. Don't generalize like. And to add to that is what I had mentioned, like the doom and gloom, where when we think of climate change, it's like catastrophe, like, I mean, the news is good at that. They're good at
The sensational side.
making it super catastrophic and like there's no turning back, but there's so much hope. There's so much hope, and I think the more I get into communications, the more I try to connect science and art. And I think art is such an entry point to talking about these things, because we all love art in some shape or form. We all love music and dancing and going to a museum to see a piece of art and like cinema. Like, this is all art. So how can we think creatively to talk about more serious problems in a hopeful way? So
that hope piece is so important.
So important. Yeah.
Just the doom and gloom, it's like, okay, so what am I supposed to do with this information?
And not gonna lie, like there's days like that where I'm like, does anything matter? The world's going to shit. Like, I can't do anything. I'm just one person. But if we all have that mentality, that's what's going to happen. But if we all hold hope and empower each other and nurture agency within our community and younger audiences and younger people, like, we will see a positive change. And it's as easy as starting with yourself and then with your community. And that's going to have a ripple effect everywhere else. And talking about solutions, like, people don't care to hear
the problems. Like,
people don't care about your problems. Like, talk about solutions, right? So leading with these solutions, because at the stage we're at, like, we're helpless. We feel helpless. So it's like, I can be different by providing solutions and thinking in more hopeful ways and more collaborative ways. So how can I talk about these controversial topics in a way that's not like one directional, but it's bilateral and it's a conversation and it's a dialogue as to like, let me hear your perspective. How can we work together? Because that's the only way that we will see success and hope and create positive impact.
We got to bring people in, even if maybe they don't care about indigenous people, but they care about birds. But at the end of the day, we want to preserve what's here and seeing that common ground.
Yeah, and I remember my first day at TNC, the Nature Conservancy. I had a friend that had my role before me. Sat at the same desk, and there was this one woman like diagonally from me. She was so hard to crack, and she's like, just talk to her about birds, compost, and granola. That's it. She will not care about anything else. And it's like, once you learn, she became my best friend. She invited me to her parties in, what's that neighborhood by the Capitol?
I don't know DC as well, but
Capitol Hill.
Okay.
She would invite me to her parties in Capitol Hill because I would talk to her about birds, granola, and compost because that's what she cared about in the whole scheme of like
everything,
the environment and nature and people. So really getting to know who you're talking to, talking about hopeful things, engaging them in conversation. You're not educating anyone. You're inspiring. You're, like I said, empowering. And then talking about solutions that you can come up with together.
So I'm curious, why do you gravitate away toward using the terminology? You're not educating anyone.
That's a great question. It sometimes feels like educating can come off a little bit condescending, like I know and you don't. That's a personal opinion. But when I think of educating, I think of someone that doesn't know something that I do. And it's more so like lead by example. So for example, with my friends and roommates and like, adopting more vegetarian diets and composting, it wasn't like me telling them or you should be composting. No, it was leading by example. So if I'd have friends over for dinner and they'd see me cooking, they'd see that I would like take out my frozen food waste, and it was more of like my actions were inspiring them, and
that can spark a conversation.
Yeah.
And like, oh, maybe we could all do this together. Versus you're doing something wrong and this is what you should be doing and here is why.
Yeah.
I think it's a very subtle change in perspective.
So subtle.
But I'm sure that it makes a pretty big impact, especially for someone who would be considered to be on the receiving end or the new person or new community who's joining in a new way of doing something different.
Right. And it's, I think as long as you are reflecting on your own impact, you're already doing more than the average person. And if you can influence one or two people, you're winning.
Some small change. Yeah, and that's a win for everybody. Is there anything that you're excited about in terms of where things are headed with what you're doing in your career or with the Nature Conservancy, or any new tools that you're using to better communicate impact?
So I think there's two parts to this question. I love the part of let's really highlight the knowledge of the communities and the indigenous peoples. So that's something that the Nature Conservancy does really well. It's like we're not putting science over the knowledge of the local communities, but we're putting it in a balance to better assess how we can implement these projects that we come in, because we're the ones that get the funding to implement the projects. So putting in a balance, as I had mentioned, what the communities have learned their whole lives, like empirical knowledge of this works here. Like, it's amazing to talk to an 80-year-old man fisher because that's all he's done his whole life. And he knows every single fish species. He knows every single mangrove species. And he knows every decade how his ecosystem and his environment has been evolving. And the importance of putting that on the forefront when we're like starting a project in these communities.
And
So,
that's a different type of knowledge than what a scientist or
right.
like the theoretical
And
could
science,
do.
a scientist doesn't have better or worse knowledge, but it's let's weigh out both of these options
Mm-hmm.
and see how we can work together with the scientist and with the local community. So that excites me where it's like without this is something that one of my professors said the first day of class, and he's like, every problem in the world is a social problem. Like at the crux of every problem, there's a human involved.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're trying to solve like increasing the fish population of this certain species, we need to consult a human on what have you seen? How has it evolved? Where do you catch the fish?
Mm-hmm.
So the Nature Conservancy, along with local partners, has been able to develop really helpful tools for the community, such as what I had mentioned. FishPath is an app where the fisher folk are able to collect their data of and track the fish population that they are used to fishing, so that they can see like the migration patterns and where is the best place to fish because these are overpopulating this area of the ocean, and this area of the ocean isn't harming the coral reef ecosystems, etc. So everything has a consequence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we are able to educate the local communities on best fishing practices through these technological tools, we are not only improving their livelihoods and their lives, but also improving the effects of the evolution of these fish species and their ecosystems.
And it sounds like this really allows like the local communities to tap into a wider knowledge base to maybe broader than what might be available where they are.
Yes, that's a great point. So, as I had mentioned in my example of working with the International Federation of the Red Cross, we initially piloted this project in 3 countries: Grenada, Jamaica, and the Dominican Republic. And it was over the course of 5 years, I believe. And after we saw really positive results for nature and people, we scaled it as an organization to other Caribbean islands, those
Mm-hmm.
being Bahamas and Haiti. Um, and the turnout of this project was so effective that the Nature Conservancy now has a recently implemented team called the Global Climate Adaptation Team. And a lot of their knowledge base comes from this project that was implemented within the Caribbean team. And it's the way that we are reducing the risk of natural disasters by implementing nature-based solutions. So
Mm-hmm.
planting more mangroves, restoring coral reefs, um, improving livelihoods by adopting more sustainable fishing practices within the communities. And these are being scaled and replicated in other what we call small island developing states. So it's not just the Caribbean adopting this project, but islands in Asia, islands in Oceania, and all small island developing states can benefit from this project and adopt the best practices from this project because it has been proven effective and replicable.
Yeah. So they're replicating what has worked in another instance.
Yes,
And they can just tap into that knowledge and bring it into where
exactly.
they are. That's amazing. Yeah, my second question was, what are some takeaways for founders who have a business where they want to have and be able to communicate more of a social or environmental impact, or people who are working with nonprofits who want to have improve what they're doing and bring that to the forefront?
Yeah, so I believe it's super important to link your cause to what your audience cares about, right? So if in the back of your mind climate change is important to you, which it should be, how can you connect that to your consumer? Because in the end, everything is connected to climate change. Absolutely everything. Your cup of coffee, your pint of beer, the clothes you wear, the food you eat, the places you travel, the way you travel, everything is connected to climate change. So finding that link and really understanding what your audience cares about and their values. Because at the end of the day, fundamentally, it's important to us because climate change is the health of humanity and the nature that we're a part of because we are nature. So really highlighting that and being very like solution oriented in the way you are communicating your business or your product. Because now more than ever, consumers are very much curious about where their product and what they're buying is coming from. So their supply chain. Is this coming from, is this meat coming from a place that was, the cow was sustainably grown and had humane conditions to grow in and die? Or is this coming from an area that was illegally deforested and the cow was held in the worst conditions possible and the cow had, like, we really do care about this because as humans, we're empathetic to others' emotions and how this is affecting other areas. So really tracing back to where is this coming product or whatever you're trying to sell or market is coming from. Because now more than ever, this is in the back of the head of the consumer. Making sure it's a clean, sustainable process where there's humane conditions and where there's no damage or harm to the environment and the people behind that. And lastly, it's the communication behind your product or whatever you're trying to action to others is empowering and it's nurturing agency to leave a better future and a better planet for the future generations. So I think those are all important considerations when you're trying to start a business that is sustainably oriented.
And that's so powerful, especially for the orientation toward hope. Like we can do something together. It's not this nihilistic, the world is ending.
Right. Because I think wherever there's light, there's also dark. So if you think we're living in dark times, it's also the time to shed light and shed hope. I think a beautiful way to do that is through communications because there's so much creativity behind that, whether that's the power of a story, the power of a narrative, the power of a piece of art or a piece of music, and how can we communicate about this greater threat that is like hugging all of us in unison. So there's so much light to shed in this moment of dark where we're really like stressed in the news about everything that's happening, floods, extreme heat waves, coral bleaching, etc. But what can we do to bring that seed of hope? Because that's what moves the world, right?
And that's what gives us a hope for tomorrow and for everyone who comes after us.
Exactly.
I love that that analogy. Where there's darkness, there has to be light.
There has
So
to
hope
be.
is, I don't want to say inevitable, but it's there. It's there.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you can be that, then do so.
Then do it. Good. I feel like I've learned so much from our conversation today. It's been so insightful. So thank you so much for sharing.
No, thank you.
With me and our
This
viewers
was
too.
super fun. And I always love talking about these things because I feel they are common knowledge, but they're not. and I'm very ingrained in this topic, so I care about it. And if I can inspire one person through my actions and what I do, that's enough for me. That's my takeaway.
Then it's worth it. Then it's worth it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.